Welcome to the Divorce Allies podcast, a podcast and video series where we dive into all things divorce, the process of creating a settlement offer with a team of financial professionals, divorce mortgage, parenting, and relationship coaches. We cover all the areas of divorce settlement process from financial to even the emotional well-being. I'm Anna Graham, the team's small business mentor, helping our members explore the potential of their next chapter. Today, I'm with Melissa Gragg, our financial mediator and negotiation expert. This episode is all about how to prepare for negotiating a settlement offer. So, Melissa, welcome. Thank you so much for being on. Can you just give us a brief background of what you do and how you're helping our clients on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. The Divorce Allies is really a group of professionals that exists around helping women in particular move through the divorce process. So for about 20 years, I've been helping women and men and couples get divorced through litigation systems, through mediation, through collaborative divorce, and other kind of alternative resolution options. So my background is really in business valuations and testifying in court and bringing some of the knowledge of the court system and what's happening in mediation basically back to the consumer and the couple, specifically the wife in these situations, and understanding how we can then move towards a settlement if one person is maybe unwilling or just doesn't know how to proceed. So a lot of times this is people's first divorce and they don't know exactly what to expect. And a lot of times when you're heading into divorce, you want to lawyer up, you want to get serious, or you want to know when you should make that first step. And so a lot of this is kind of backing up a little bit and saying, how do we look at a settlement offer? How do we look at collecting documents or taking this from a little bit different perspective? So
Yeah.
hopefully today will be a little bit different perspective from it.
Well, I kind of wanted to pause right there because that's exactly why we're here recording this. When a couple starts to think about getting a divorce and maybe even takes that first step on calling an attorney or a financial expert, there are terms being flown around: litigation, mediation, collaborative divorce, settlement offers, and it's very overwhelming. We hear all the time from our clients in the membership, your clients. It's a lot to handle. And so when we talk about this settlement agreement, we're going to start just at the very basics of what even is a settlement agreement. So this is a term that we are going to drill into our members' heads. And it's so essential to know kind of everything about this because this is going to get you to that finish line. So, Melissa, what is a settlement agreement?
Yeah. And for the most part, when you're starting off, you're trying to figure out like, what do I do to go through the divorce process? And for the most part, you're looking at your friends, other people you know, your CPA, your financial planner, and you're just like, where do I start? And a lot of times by default, everybody's saying to call an attorney and to talk to an attorney. Now, at the moment that you kind of do that, if you're on either side, it just kind of starts this maybe fighting process in a lot of people's minds. And so they're really trying to figure out a lot of information so that they don't start that process, because then they're like, oh my gosh, it's going to blow up everything. Like, how do we get together? So a settlement agreement is really looking at it from, what would I reasonably be willing to walk away with? And a settlement, like you could call it a settlement offer. We have in the court system, we have settlement conferences, which are really just coming to the judge and saying, the judge says, hey, where are you guys on settlement? So a lot of people talk about what it means to put together that agreement, but they're usually waiting till the end. And they're like, well, once we figure out everything, we'll put together our agreement and we're able to mediate it, or we were able to talk about some things. And then you can always have a few things that you take to the court. So you don't have to agree on everything. You don't have to settle everything. You don't have to do it in mediation or collaborative. Really, you can do it in any of these processes, but you're still getting divorced. And by way of marriage, you've entered into a legal contract with your spouse. And so to get out of that legal contract, you then have to go through some sort of litigation process, even if you're just filing and then finishing with an attorney. And so a settlement agreement, at the core basics, you're looking at creating a property statement, which is going to be your list of assets and debts. And then you're going to be looking at your income and expenses. And so that could be considered a budget, but we're not really looking at it for a budget perspective. We're looking at what is your current income to each of you, and then what are the expenses that either one of you is going to stay in that house and then one of you is going to have other expenses, or you're both going to sell the house and have other expenses. But it's running through that process of, what do we have? What am I willing to keep? What am I willing to let go of? Right? Because we don't need to fight about everything. If you want the cat and I want the dog, it's like, okay, like what happens is most people position and they want to find out at the very beginning, like, what is my best offer? Like, what can I get? What is the court going to give me? So they start talking to their friends. They're like, well, did you get full custody? No, you didn't. Did you get the house? No, you didn't. Did you get all the retirement? No. And so everybody's got these stories. And the reality is, I think you got to get away from all of those stories. Every single judge is different. Every single court system is different. Every community is different. And when you're getting divorced, you're filing in the area that you live. And so you're really bound by those court system, if you will, or the whim of the judge. When you step out of that system, you just use the system to file what you agree upon, then maybe you could move through mediation. Regardless of where you are in the process, putting together a settlement agreement and knowing that it's just your property and debts, and then it's your income and expenses, that those are conversations that you could potentially have together because they're factually based. Now, when you see manipulation, it's going to be because one person has a business and they might say it's separate, or they have a business and they're running cash flow through it and you're not aware of it. You don't have access to those records. And or if they're doing bad deeds, they're going to run those things through the business potentially. It's just typically where we see the most leeway that you have, that a person would have access to cash and would have ways to hide the cash. So if you don't have some of those issues, inheritance, separate assets, hiding assets, then realistically, you guys could sit down and be like, okay, we have a house. What's it worth? Well, what's the mortgage? These are factual things that have statements. Can you provide me with that statement? And that's going to be a big piece of what any mediator, lawyer, or person in a couple should be considering is, what are we talking about? What are we agreeing to? And is there any financial backup, like a statement or some information that can prove out those numbers, so you're just not relying upon the trust of your spouse, because that's usually gone at the point that you're entering into a divorce.
Yeah, definitely. And I know from our standpoint, we always advocate that you do this as a couple because it's starts the divorce on clear communication and everything is fact based. But we do know that unfortunately sometimes that doesn't happen. And most of the times the out spouse or the spouse that hasn't been informed a lot of the income is kind of left to almost do this on their own. So I know that you just went over really what is included in the settlement agreement, but for someone listening who's wondering like, okay, but how do I, like, what's my first step that I could take right now to access some of that numbers, those sheets, those, income statements? Where should they even start with that? Like, how can they prepare today to collect all of these things for the property statement?
Yeah, and it's going to be a simple process at the beginning, okay? Like literally starting out with a spreadsheet or a journal book, right? That you start to put together. We have other books that are preparation and workbooks and downloadable journals and guides through the Divorce Allies, but you can just simply get a binder or a workbook or whatever you like to keep, if it's on your iPad, whatever it is. We also talk about a secure way of holding these documents, and we use a bubble up platform, which we can talk more about. But you first have to see, okay, am I safe and secure in keeping documents on my own computer, or am I comfortable with writing it out? So it's as basic as, I prefer spreadsheets, and I think it's a real good way to add up things. And so we have some downloadable spreadsheets that we can offer out to the community as well. But this is going to be just literally like starting with the house. You have a house mortgage statement that has a lot of information on it. You have a, maybe you just purchased the house, so you have a settlement statement that has a lot of information on it. Maybe you applied to get a loan for a house or car, which also has a lot of information for it. So at the beginning, you're just collecting, what do you have access? If you have access to like a primary checking and savings account or any financial retirement account, you can reach out to your CPA, you can reach out to your financial planner, and you can say, hey, can I have, right now it's the year end. Financial planners love to meet you at the year end. They really would love to meet you at any times on a quarterly basis. So if you haven't met them, reach out to them and say, can I have my, your prior reports, or do you have a listing of all of our assets? Because a lot of times they do. You go to your CPA and say, can I have my past 3 tax returns? And so it's really just, what do you have access to? And it's starting to put it on a list. You have 2 cars, list the 2 cars. Can you do one step further and pull up Blue Book? Print it out. Have it ready for this discussion. Print out Zillow and Realtor and the personal property on the real estate assessor's site. Pull up those 3 pieces of information for the house. It gives you a reference point for maybe what it's worth, but a lot of times people understand what the house is worth, but there's improvements that need to be done. Start listing out the improvements that you think need to be done that maybe would go to sell the house or to prep it. Because if you're going to keep it and it has a lot of work that needs to be done, you may want to factor that in. If you're going to sell it, some of the stuff may need to be done or may not, and you would just list it. So at the very beginning, the property statement is literally just listing out, do you have a tractor? Do you have a retirement account? Do you have a pension account? A lot of times, if you work for a big corporation, you could have restricted stock units. You could have a pension that hasn't vested. You could have, so vesting is important in a divorce. What you're really looking at for the most part is that when people get divorced, they either need to value things at the date that they're filing or like separation, or typically the date of trial. So if you're in a state that's the date of separation, that's great, because you know what date that is. You can determine what that date is, and then you look at the values of all of those things at that date. If it's at trial, we don't know when that is. So that's going to be somewhere in the future, and we're going to have to update that information. But for right now, you just get it at the most recent month. You put those numbers in, and you're starting to get like an idea of what the total pie is, right? So everything, all of your property, less your debt, gets you to what we call equity. Equity in your house, and this could be equity in your marriage. And so the equity, in theory, is going to be split somewhat even, but they're going to be in these buckets. So the house could go in this bucket, and now the house somebody has, but I don't have a lot in my space. So I might get some retirement, or I might get some bank accounts, and now we have even dollars. Just because there's even dollars doesn't mean they are even or 50-50. There's other considerations.
So, Melissa, I'm just going to pause you really quick, because as you were talking, I made this question. Is a successful settlement agreement usually a 50-50 split? Because I just wanted to pause you. I think you're about to go into it beautifully But I just wanted to reiterate that I think a lot of us, even me, when I was learning about all of this, you can't just take the house and split it down the middle. You can't just give one car, one kid, half of this checking account, half of this checking account. I think a lot of the times we think that, okay, settlement means we're just going to draw a line to the middle, 50-50, we're done. So I think just continue with kind of your representation of maybe it's a little bit of this here and a little bit of this there.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because again, when people are starting to put this in columns, they're like, okay, the house, we have a $300,000 house and we have $100,000 in debt, so we each get $100,000. So then you have to say, okay, how am I going to get that money out of the mortgage, right? Am I going to take another loan, which means now I'm going to go into more debt, which is expenses, right? And how is this going to work? So it does go back to, is everything a 50-50 split? No. Like, you'll see a lot of people talk about, like, it's never a 50-50 split. It's even more complicated than that. Is you will have income like, this is really the issue. You will have income producing assets and you will have income depleting assets. So what does that mean? An income depleting asset is your house. So what does it do? It takes cash. It takes cash to keep it up. It takes cash to get the yard. It takes cash for the mortgage. A business or even an investment is an income producing asset. So you sit $100,000 in the bank, you can make interest on it. You put $100,000 in cryptocurrency, you could make a ton of money on it. You put $100,000 in a piece of land, what can it do to make cash flow, or is it then going to consume? So that's a big issue in a 50-50 split. Is most of the time people will be like, oh, I want the house, or pay me out of the house. And if there's no other assets to pay you out of, you might be looking at a property settlement, which is payable over time. And people are like, well, I don't want alimony and I don't want payments from them over time. Totally understand. So that's where this is typically several meetings of negotiation, typically with a mediator or some referee, if you will. And we're going through each of these things. Like, what do we do with the house? Can we either one of us afford it, or do we need to sell it? If we need to sell it, once we sell it, there could be that we pay off some debt from that. And then we split the proceeds, and all of us are walking away with what is left or remaining because we sold that asset. If one person keeps the house and another person gets retirement, well, you have a house that is also income depleting. You have a retirement that is making money, but you can't touch it until you get divorced. But it's also potentially pre-tax. So now you have tax considerations to say, oh, well, that retirement, is it really worth that amount? Or when I pay taxes on, is it going to be a reduced amount? You know, the pension is going to pay in the future. Well, what is it worth something today? That's a gray area in some divorces. Like, some people may say it's worth something, some people may say it's not. So you just have to identify where are some gray areas. Inheritance, we see a lot that people take in some money from family members and buy a house. And they're like, wait a second, when they get divorced, they're like, oh, we just gave it to the one spouse. We didn't give that to you. So they should get credit for that equity in the house. So there's a lot of different ways that people can talk about these things. But in essence, in the settlement agreement, you're putting them all in a big pile and you're adding them up. And now you're saying, hey, we have $500,000 total equity in the house, equity in the cars, maybe some post-tax retirement. Now we have a bucket of $500,000. How do we want to split the bucket? And there could be certain things that you want that could be less value. So it's worth it to not split it evenly. Like, I want the farm because I can make money on it. I want the business because I can make money on it in the future. that might be worth it for me to take and give you something more, but I'm understanding the value, not only the value from a number standpoint that we're putting on that spreadsheet, and we could argue or disagree on those numbers, but also then what are we going to do with the cash flow, and how is that being allocated, and what is the value to me? So in divorce, we sometimes be like, well, I don't want you to have the house. I don't want somebody to be in my bed. But the reality is, if you flip this around, the settlement offer agreement should be based on what you want. Like,
Mhm.
I don't want to be in the house that's too big for me and too expensive. I want something different. I don't want that car that I can't afford the payment on. I want something different. It's like, this is the time to make better financial decisions, but you first have to know, what are you working with? So if somebody's hiding that information or has accounts that, like a lot of people have separate accounts, they have joint accounts and then they have separate accounts. It's going to be a willingness of both of you to share that information. And that's how you could work together. That's going to be one of your best ways to save time, money, and effort. But if the other person is highly toxic or doesn't seem to be working with you, it's still in your best interest to try to have these initial discussions to get the documents, to get the access. Like, hey, could you pull it up on your screen and we can just download the statements, right? If we download the statements and we get 12 or 24 months of statements, each of you can look at each other's information and determine if there's anything that is of concern. If there's infidelity, if there's marital waste or money being spent on, somebody outside of the marriage, it doesn't need to be a deal breaker. I know it emotionally is a deal breaker, but financially, we may just need to deal with it and say, oh, okay, how much did you spend on them? 20, 30, $40,000. Okay, half of that was your money and half of that was my money. And I would like credit for the half that you spent of my money, my marital money, in some other asset. So that's how we first have to get all, like when you're putting together a puzzle, you need to get all of the pieces, start to put it together, and then what is missing?
Right. And again, in the best case scenario, you and your spouse are working together and there's clear communication, all the puzzle pieces are laid out. Maybe you have a mediator helping you kind of facilitate these conversations if there's some disagreements. But at the end of the day, a lot of times you are doing this on your own, and then you're going to present this beautiful settlement agreement that you've taken so much time on, and your spouse just might completely disregard it or just say, "No, I disagree. I'm not I'm not dealing with any of this." So then that's kind of where we go to the next step, and you have to start negotiating a bit. And I know that we're already at a little bit of time, but I just want to touch the tip of the iceberg when we get into negotiation. And if you just have some simple theories or strategies around that we can at least address today, and then maybe have an additional episode where we kind of get more into it, I think that'd be really beneficial, because I know a lot of our even members have a spouse that will have completely disregarded all of their work when it came to creating this settlement agreement.
And this goes back to something that we talk about a lot in the circle. Like, your thoughts create your reality. And so if you go into this being like, oh, my spouse will never agree to this. Oh, they'll never come to a mediator. They'll never sit down and talk. They'll never, 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 never. You're creating that reality. And so you have to kind of get in the mind space of, if we are going to save money, if we are going to do this together, if we want a rational space, because the reality is the majority of you do not have complex financial issues. The majority of you do not have highly toxic partners. You may have a lack of trust, and so you don't believe them. That's where a mediator could come in and just be like, hey, these are the things we talk about in a parenting plan. These are the things we talk about in a financial settlement. These are the things that we talk about in going forward. But if they refuse to even look at the settlement agreement, the concept is that you are negotiating based on the truth. And if you're negotiating based on the truth, it doesn't matter at what point, like right now, I don't care what stage you are at in your process. If you have not discussed a settlement offer with your team, if you have not created, if every waking moment isn't spent on putting together a settlement offer, you are wasting your time and your team might not know how to do it. And so, and it's perfectly fine. I've been doing this for 20 years. And it really has only become very clear very recently that we should all be working off of an ongoing settlement offer. Like at all times, this is what I would walk away from because most people's assets are finite. Like I only have this, that, and the other. And they have statements that say what the values are. And so it just is what it is. If we don't like it, that's different. Okay. But having them come to a mediator, have them meet the mediator, have them choose a mediator, because in a lot of our teachings and education and our templates, you're the hero. You're coming in and you're using the mediator to just facilitate this discussion about an offer. So if you put together an offer, you would sit on that offer if you go to mediation, if you go to litigation, you give the offer to the other side through their attorney, actually to them, set it down next to the coffee machine, let them find it in the morning if you're still living together. These are all actual realities that could happen, but putting together the settlement gets you clearer on what you want to do. It gets you clearer on, do I want the house? Do I not want the house? Not, do I want the house so that the kids can have a better life? Or I don't want to hurt the kids, or I don't want to change. Like, this is going to be a big change. Everything, if you deal with it in a truthful manner, is going to be the way that you position it no matter what. So if he doesn't want to look at it, or they don't want to consider talking to you, you would still create the offer. You would still either push it over to them, email it to them, have a record that you've sent it to them, and then you wait. Because if you end up filing in the system, which most people have to at least file and then finish it in the system, then in that system, after you file, you have a cooling off period. And then you either, sometimes you're mandated to have mediation if there's kids involved. And so you might have to go to a 2-hour mediation session. I encourage you to find a mediator that has knowledge about all the issues that you think are important. And then you use that 2 hours to try to talk about the kids, but then to extend it into a longer, like, could we come back to you and talk to you about more information? Again, you already have the settlement offer. And so you're literally like, hey, mediator, can you help me convince this dude to separate and to be done? Because usually there's emotional attachments that are harder to break than the financial attachments. So we're kind of going into that space of saying, if you don't agree to it and if you don't want to look at it, then you went to the mediator in the litigation. Now you get to go to the judge, and the judge is like, hey, first thing, settlement conference, status conference, update status meeting, right? They sometimes even called settlement things, right? Settlement conferences. You go in, the judge says, hey, where are you guys on settlement? And you say, well, I sent them an email 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago,
Yep.
whatever it is. And then they come back and say, well, now the judge looks at the other side and is like, so what's your problem with the offer? So at all times, if you prep this, if you're in collaborative divorce, you would create, like, what most people are doing is relying upon their team, their attorney, to know or do all of these things. And I'm telling you right now, as people listen to this, they're like, nobody's talked to me about a settlement offer. And I'm like, I know.
And that's why we're here.
So
I
anyway.
mean, that's exactly it. And again, we know that this time you are having information coming at you from everywhere, from the internet, from TikTok, from Instagram, from your best friends, from your sisters, everywhere. And so we're just trying to create a community with these professionals and experts who do this every single day. They've seen the worst of the worst, the easiest of the easiest. you will fall somewhere in between. And our experts have experience working with all of these things, whether it's divorce mediation, settlement agreements, parenting plans, figuring out the mortgage, and even the emotional side too. So
And
yeah.
really to end it out, because we've kind of gone through all of this, in the wide scheme of things, most of people get to the point of trying to decide what to do in a divorce, even and are just like crippled by all of the decisions and all of the options. And oh my God, there's 1,800 different coaches, and there's so many people saying you'd have to do this first and you have to do this first. The reality is there are things that you can do that cost no money, that don't take any time or effort other than your own. And right now you're choosing whether you spend the time and effort and do it yourself until you get to a point where you need a team or you need advice, or you're just going to sit and do nothing. And the other spouse is typically also going to do nothing. And so you're just kind of kicking the can into the future, as opposed to, or you're saying, well, when I have the money, or when I talk to them, when they want to do this process, then I will do it. No, you can take steps now to start to collect the documents, collect the information, put it together in a cohesive manner. The Divorce Allies was created to be a low cost solution that helps you walk through this process and gets you divorced. You still may have to file or finish with an attorney. You still may need an attorney, but the financial pieces are the areas that the attorney cannot help you with. And so this settlement concept, you'd be like, well, why isn't my attorney or mediator talking about it? They don't know. They just don't know what they don't know. And it's weird that they wouldn't know this, but I have to have you understand that there's things that you can do that will be better than what you could do with the team, but also you could start now. So it's really in your own mindset of, do I have this capability? Yes. Is it as easy as we talk about? Yes and no, but at least the beginning pieces are low cost. You're doing them. You figure out how you can do it safely and effectively and keep records up into, a safe place, and don't communicate as much as you can unless you want it to be found on email. So any emails that you send are really part of the story that you're creating, that you are telling them how to settle this. So if you need more information, obviously we're going to talk about this more in future podcasts, but we also have that you could sign up for a membership today in the Divorce Allies and get access to all of this immediately.
Absolutely. And with this podcast and our YouTube channel and the website, we have tons of free resources. So again, if you're not to the point where you want to join a membership, that's absolutely fine. We have so much that we just want to provide that at least get you to that first step. So thedivorceallies.com, Melissa's website, if you need more information about her and her process, is valuationmediation.com. This was an incredible episode. Thank you, Melissa, and tune in next week for more.
Quick questions.
Yeah. Here are a few frequently asked questions that we get from prospective clients or members when they're first talking to us. So probably the number one question is, what are my options when I want to file for divorce? So Melissa, let us know. I know there's a few, but can you give us some more insight on that?
Yeah, a lot of times people think the first thing that they should do is call an attorney. And obviously, we're a little biased in saying, from a financial perspective, you always need a financial expert. And this is one thing that you're just not going to know when you go in to file for divorce, that a lot of the initial things that you file are financially based. So, like in the state of Missouri, you're filing a property statement and a statement of income and expenses. And those are both very financial, but the attorney may do it first. So in reality, if you step back one step further, you're going to say, okay, what are my options even to file for divorce? So even to file, you may have to hire an attorney to actually file in your state, but a lot of states are allowing other ways to get divorced. So with the advent of AI and like apps, basically, you now have services that could allow you to help you file. And a lot of times those resources are under a concept called pro se. And so that's when you represent yourself. It's PROSE. And so that doesn't mean that you have to represent yourself the entire time, but if you search for that word and your state, you're going to get all of the free resources and how to file. Like, what do you need to do? What documents do you need to file? How do you file it into the court system? Then you have to have your spouse served, which means they have to officially receive those documents so that they know a court proceeding has started. And typically you have to do that regardless of what option you choose to go through divorce anyway. So that's the filing, the initial piece. Sometimes it's just filing, and then you each have 30 days to create these other items. And 30 days is not a long time. So then you might choose, okay, we'll work with a mediator and we'll bring our attorneys. We'll work with a mediator and just us go. We'll work with a parenting coordinator that goes through a parenting plan. We'll work with a housing specialist that might go through, whether we can keep the house or not. The mediator is not necessarily your friend in the fact that they're trying to just get you to reconcile and be done with this as fast as possible. So they may not care as much. So then you have collaborative, which is a more organized kind of mediation that has professionals and a middle coach that's going to kind of direct the process. So again, all of these have costs. And all of these have time that they take. A typical divorce, even if it's simple, could still take 6 to 12 months just to file, and you agree to simple things, and then to get it through the court system, because you would have to submit that like in a settlement agreement or a divorce decree or some sort of final document that says, here's what we have, here's how we're going to split it, and you submit that back to the court. How you do it is a lot of different ways. It could include an attorney. It could include other team members.
Another question we get a lot of the time is, okay, someone has decided they potentially want to file, but they haven't filed yet. So they're in this limbo of wanting to start to prepare for this upcoming marathon, but it hasn't started yet. What can someone do before they actually file?
So a couple of things that we want to ask you is, are you safe? And are you capable of having discussions like this with your spouse? In some cases, the D word, divorce, has been thrown around over several years of your marriage, and you're now getting to the point of you think you're finally done. A lot of times, the other person may not be totally ready to make those steps. So, again, before you file, I think it's collecting your financial documents. And for the most part, people are concerned about, like, can I afford to get divorced? Can I afford to live on my own? Can I support myself? Like, a lot of these are questions from a position that you don't have any power or control over the finances. And so if you don't have control of the finances, it could be that you need to figure out, is there marital money that you can move? Is there a portion of it that you can put into another account? You might need legal advice in that capacity. You might need legal advice to determine where you file or how you file. But typically, you need legal advice when there's a nuance or an issue, like a separate asset or inheritance or hiding assets or a toxic partner. So a lot of times you're just trying to figure out if you have any of those things present, and or prepping it low cost ways and finding resources that are free. And so if you can do some of those things, you can be more prepared for the financial. And it may be that you don't know everything, but you know what you know, and you know what you're missing, and you can request those from your spouse. And if they hesitate or they take too long, you have other options and you can move the process forward on your own.
Another question we get very frequently is, who should be on my divorce team? And this, I think traditionally people think it just should be your lawyer. But now, again, because of social media and information overload, there are so many different professionals that people can choose from. But Melissa, who are some key players that people should really consider to have on their divorce team?
A couple things is I think that when you go through, like, what are your main issues? Like at the very beginning, before you file or before you go through this process, like, what are our main issues? And I ask this in mediations all the time. Our main issue is the kids. Second issue might be where I live. Third issue is I haven't been working, and how does this alimony or maintenance and child support work? And those are all very uncomfortable conversations. And so on your divorce team, if you can first, and then if you have a business, a lot of times you don't have some of these complexities of a separate asset, an inheritance, a business, or hiding assets. Okay. So mistrust in some capacity. Because if you have on your divorce team a lawyer, then you're going to get legal advice. A lot of times lawyers will want to be hired, but they then want to kind of gatekeep the process and they don't want to include other professionals. And so that's where, when you're really looking at the lawyer you hire, how did you enter into that hiring them? Did you hire a shark? Did you hire the person that's going to go annihilate the other side? Then they're probably not going to listen to you in this process. So your divorce team has to be a combination of people that you pay, of people that are support in your real life, and that give you advice. And so if you really have some legal issues, which is alimony, child support, separate concepts, those are all very much legal issues, then you're going to need some legal advice. You also need the financial advice, and not your financial planner or your CPA. Unfortunately, those people are really good at what they do, but they're also in a conflict of interest, as that they worked for both of you, and it's hard to give one person information without sharing it with the other. And if you're not the person that had the relationship with that person, they're probably going to have a better relationship with your spouse, and they're going to tell the spouse everything that you tell them. A mediator is going to be important at some point, but they're just a facilitator. They're not your friend. They're not your best. You don't tell them everything. You use them as a person to communicate the settlement offer and to get it over. So additional people on your divorce team could be a mortgage specialist. Like, can you keep the house? Can you transfer the mortgage? What can you do? A narcissistic coach is going to help you get prepared to extract yourself from that toxic situation. And the extraction process may seem like, of course, that's easy and I want to do it, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And then you could have a parenting specialist. You could also have voc rehab specialists. We also have cryptocurrency specialists right now, because we see a lot of people kind of doing some bad deeds with crypto. So we're always subpoenaing like Coinbase and other things. But your divorce team should be made up of individuals that really support your biggest three issues in your divorce. And then even if they're really smart in what they do, if they do not have divorce specific experience, mediation specific experience, litigation experience, then they could be giving you advice from a perspective that is not holistically a perspective that gives you all of the different pieces of information. So that's usually and again, as you're hiring people, ask them if they're okay being part of a team. I will tell you, most of them will tell you very much up front if they're willing to be part of a team, or if they need to be the leader of the team. And to find an attorney that may not need to be the leader of the team is like golden, but it's not typically how they're hired. So asking these questions up front will help you then when you put your team together.